1,418 days. That's exactly how long, according to Soviet historiography, the so-called Great Patriotic War lasted. And that's exactly how long Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine has been going on. By this point in World War II, Berlin was surrounded, and the war was entering its final phase. In the same amount of time, the Russian General Staff can only lie once again about capturing Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region, or the non-existent Komsomolsk in Donetsk. During this period, the losses of the aggressor country's army have exceeded 1,200,000 people. Let's take a closer look at how the Kremlin uses Soviet propaganda myths in its war against Ukraine. The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin began his aggression, just like Adolf Hitler, without declaring war, early in the morning on February 24, 2022. His army struck peaceful Ukrainian cities, while official statements were filled with lies about supposedly protecting Russian speakers. Hiding behind the historical myth of so-called brotherly nations, a concept formed back in the Soviet era, Putin has in fact set out to destroy the Ukrainian nation.
Russia cannot feel safe, develop, or even exist with the constant threat coming from the territory of modern Ukraine.
By liberation, the aggressor country means the complete destruction of Ukrainian cities along with their inhabitants. It is noteworthy that while presenting Russia as the successor to the Soviet Union, the Kremlin is actually following not the Soviet but the Nazi playbook of the 1940s. The attack on Ukraine, mass killings, and the denial of an entire people's right to exist. To justify the invasion, the Kremlin came up with abstract and legally meaningless goals, the so-called denazification and demilitarization. However, within the first few months, when the war did not go according to plan, Moscow mentioned these stated goals less and less, and then stopped talking about them altogether. But in December 2022, Putin finally let something slip.
You previously mentioned that some entirely new territories have recently appeared. Well, that's still quite a remarkably significant and noteworthy result, when you agree.
All 26 years in power, Putin has fueled the myth of the Great Victory. And Kremlin propaganda has convinced Russians that we can do it again. The logic is simple. If our so-called grandfathers fought, then today's mobilized soldiers and contract servicemen can do it too. However, in the 1,418 days it took the Soviet army to go from the Volga to Berlin, Putin's troops have gotten stuck near Pokrovsk.
For Putin, who made the USSR's victory over Nazi Germany the cornerstone of national ideology, the low effectiveness of the Russian army is an unpleasant reminder that his military machine is not as well oiled as his military officials would have him believe. That's exactly why he will do everything he can to avoid showing weakness. From a publication in the Times.
However, Putin's generals have adopted the Soviets' favorite tactic, throwing waves of cannon fodder at the front. But the war itself has changed, and the Ukrainian armed forces have shown how to effectively resist an enemy with superior numbers. Ukraine's defense forces are quickly adapting and modernizing. Drones are saving the lives of Ukrainian soldiers by allowing them to precisely destroy enemy personnel and equipment from a distance. The so-called Killzone, an area where Ukrainian UAVs prevent Russian troops from moving, now stretches up to 10 kilometers. This was stated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Sivsky. According to him, in December 2025, drone system units neutralized more than 33,000 Russian soldiers. That's about as many as Russia mobilizes in a month.
In many cases, of course, it's a one-way road. Very often, that's exactly how it ends for Russian troops. That's precisely why the losses have increased so much. The number of assault operations has also gone up in the USSR, but the losses have increased as well. Indeed, just at the end of last year, and now we've reached a point where, for perhaps the first time during the full-scale invasion, Russian troops do not have the potential and are not building up their military grouping. The numbers remain relatively stable. They are only able to make up for their losses.
Putin keeps convincing himself and Russians that the Soviet Union is the same as Russia. And it is specifically Russia that is said to have defeated Nazi Germany in World War II. In Putin's alternative version of history, there is no mention that Ukrainians and all the peoples of the Soviet Union fought in the ranks of the Soviet army. Nor is the cost of that war mentioned. During World War II, Ukraine lost between 8 and 10 million people. And there's another fact that's extremely inconvenient for Putin. The victory over the Axis countries was the achievement of the entire anti-Hitler coalition. In 1942, it included 26 countries, and by 1945, 54. Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine has been going on for almost 4 years, and that's it. More and more Russians are asking a simple question. Why?
All of this will keep going. It kind of just keeps going. So the so-called special military operation will last longer than the victorious war they keep proclaiming. In other words, there are a lot of problems, so they have to come up with something, make up stories. They tell these stories with absolute confidence and just lie straight to your face, and they do it with such acting skills. And all of this is really sad.
Here's another fact that Russian propaganda keeps quiet about, is that without US Lend-Lease and the help of its allies, the Soviet army would not have been able to remain combat ready. Through Lend-Lease, the Soviet Union received over 400,000 vehicles, about 2,000 locomotives, rails, industrial equipment, and food supplies, tens of thousands of machine tools, and hundreds of thousands of tons of meat, sugar, and fats, which help supply both the front lines and the rear. Ukraine is also receiving military aid from its partners. Modern tanks, artillery systems, air defense systems like Patriot, NASAMS, IRIS-T, combat aircraft including F-16s, and ammunition. And to deter the aggressor in the future, Europe is ready to support Kiev even after the war between Russia and Ukraine ends.
We will take on joint responsibility as a coalition of the willing. We want to help build strong Ukrainian armed forces for the future. Ukrainian armed forces that will reliably deter Russia through weaponry, training, and funding. We'll participate in monitoring the ceasefire and will help strengthen Ukraine on land, at sea, and in the air.
It must be acknowledged that Russia is also receiving military aid. But it is being helped by the same kind of dictatorial regimes, the so-called new axis of evil countries, as they are called in the media. Thanks to Iran, the Russian army first learned to use and then began to produce on its own attack drones that are used daily to strike peaceful Ukrainian cities. In turn, North Korea. As of July 2025, it has delivered about 28,000 containers of weapons and artillery shells to Moscow. We're talking about 12 million artillery rounds. Kim Jong-un has also already sent about 12,000 of his soldiers to Russia to take part in the war against Ukraine. And according to South Korea's intelligence service, he plans to send Putin just as many more. The North Atlantic Alliance considers such cooperation a direct threat to its security and declares its readiness to counter it.
Russia has joined forces with China, North Korea, and Iran. They are expanding their armed forces and capabilities. They are preparing for a long-term confrontation. Delaying the solution to this problem is dangerous. To strengthen NATO, we must increase defense spending, which is the foundation of everything. Allies will have to invest much more to achieve new capability goals. 1,418
days. Back then, for the Soviet Union, it was the end of the war. Today, for Russia, this is a war with no end. Colossal losses, international isolation, and economic crisis. Russia's paying a terrible price for its dictator's dreams of imperial greatness. And Putin will make sure it pays even more.